Tonight, mass murder in Paris. Terrorists kill more than 120 people in coordinated attacks across the city. A 19-year-old woman from Hobart shot while a Melbourne woman cheats death at a rock concert targeted by gunmen. The French president vows a ruthless response as Malcolm Turnbull pledges to stand shoulder to shoulder in the fight against terror. And Victoria Police steps up security at major landmarks as Melbourne mourns with the world.
This is 9 News with Brett McLeod.
Good evening. Paris, the city of light, has been plunged into darkness by terrorists who've murdered at least 120 innocent people. Masked gunmen targeted civilians at restaurants, a concert and a football match before blowing themselves up. It's suspected Islamic State is responsible for the attacks. Damian Ryan begins our coverage.
It was terror in any language. What was hard to understand was the magnitude of this atrocity and the casualties it left behind. The city of Paris had come under a planned and coordinated attack, which unfolded live on television. France was playing Germany, then this happened. The players hesitated and the fans were confused. The blast was a suicide bomber blowing himself up outside the entrance to the famous Stade de France and killing at least 3 people. The French president, François Hollande, was in the stands. This is the moment he is told of the attacks. He's evacuated to safety while the crowd sought refuge on the pitch. The terrorists were in a gang, splitting up and seeking out targets across the city. The crowds of people were enjoying a Friday night in Paris. This taxi driver almost drove into their pub.
Ça tire, ça tire mon pistolet. Oh là là. Oh putain, ça tire sec.
The Bataclan Theatre was singled out. American rock band Eagles of Death Metal were performing to a sellout show. This is the scene just moments before at least 2 gunmen wearing black, armed with AK-47s, grenades and suicide vests burst in and locked the doors. They yelled, "This is for Syria" and "Allah Akbar, God is great," and began shooting their victims one by one. Witnesses say it lasted a horrifying 10 minutes. It was a bloodbath. I was hiding under other people, this hostage said. Then they started shooting, stopping from time to time. At least 2 Australians were in the theatre. And 19-year-old Emma Grace Parkinson from Hobart was shot and wounded. Her family has confirmed she's in a Paris hospital. Her condition is unknown. 30-year-old Melbourne woman Sophie Doran was more fortunate.
The bullets started flying, I suppose, is the words. They went to ground and hid under the rows of seats.
Dad Michael got the call this morning.
A friend had been shot, and so they pretended they were dead until I think the police got them out.
At least 118 people were executed and 200 were injured. This man was shot in the stomach but was saved by his mobile phone.
To have seen that and bodies everywhere and pretending you're dead, that must be a horrible experience.
These shaky images capture the moment when police stormed the theatre. The sound is unmistakable.
Est-ce que vous avez tous entendu?
The special forces made their move after hostages inside pleaded via social media there was no time for negotiation. I'm still at Bataclan. They're cutting down all of the world one by one. First floor soon. Carnage, dead bodies everywhere. In all, there are at least half a dozen targets across Paris, and the attacks were mounted with sinister precision. It began at 9:16 p.m. Paris time, not far from the landmark so familiar to the world. In the 10th district, the shooting at Le Petit Cambodge, or Little Cambodia restaurant, and the Caroline Bar. In the 11th district, the deadly hostage drama at the Bataclan Concert Hall. It was nearly 1 in the morning before the situation here was brought under control. There was another explosion and more shooting at the Forum des Halles shopping centre. And almost simultaneously to the north, the explosion at a bar near the Stade de France and the resulting chaos inside the stadium.
Tonight is like if it was the end of the world. We could hear some gunshots and on the sirens and the copters everywhere, and this is the scary thing.
The reaction from the French government was to seal the city and the country. Paris was in lockdown and the borders closed for the first time since the Second World War. But those responsible had no intention of getting out alive. There were up to 8 terrorists involved. 7 are thought to have committed suicide by blowing themselves up. As expected, within a few hours of the attack, Islamic State claimed the deadly work was all theirs. The world expressed its sorrow and promised justice. While the French themselves responded with a display of defiance and unity. The Marseillaise, a national anthem after a night of terror. Damian Ryan, 9 News.
Today's atrocities are the latest in a string of brutal attacks that have rocked France this year. Many terror experts believe the nation is paying the price for being one of the first to join the US-led coalition in the fight against Islamic State. Eddy Meyer explains.
Since the beginning of this year, France has been a nation under siege. In January, gunmen shot dead a policeman before launching an attack on the offices of satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo. At the end of this murderous rampage, 12 people were dead, including 2 police officers and 8 of Charlie Hebdo's senior staff. The gunmen, brothers Saeed and Sharif Kouachi, were aligned to Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. They escaped, leading to a massive manhunt. Just 1 day later, another brutal attack in Paris. Ahmadi Koulibaly shot and killed a police officer and wounded a street sweeper in the suburb of Montrouge before escaping. On January 9, a showdown with the Charlie Hebdo killers. The Kouachi brothers were cornered at a printing business northeast of Paris where they'd taken hostages. After a 9-hour siege, police stormed the building, killing them both. But the trail of terror was far from over, with yet another attack on the same day. Still on the loose, a heavily armed Ahmadi Koulibaly entered a kosher supermarket in East Paris, killing 4 people and taking several hostages before he too was shot and killed by police. Just 5 months later, France was again under attack from radical Islam. A French Muslim of North African descent decapitated his former boss at a factory near Lyon. In August, another potentially deadly attack was averted. A Moroccan gunman opened fire on a high-speed train between Amsterdam and Paris. He was overpowered by 2 unarmed US soldiers with the help of fellow passengers. And just a couple of weeks ago, another terror plot foiled. An alleged terrorist was arrested. He was believed to be planning an attack on a military base in Toulon. A number of sources report Islamic State claiming responsibility for today's attack. Regardless, France remains determined to maintain its strategically vital role in fighting ISIL in Syria and Iraq. French fighter jets were among the first to join the US in bombing raids on ISIL targets.
This is the premium you pay for being involved in these kinds of places. It's just a matter of when, not if, these attacks are going to take place.
Throughout this year, ISIL has released propaganda videos specifically targeting France, calling for supporters to wage war. At the same time, around 300 French nationals are fighting with terror groups in Iraq and Syria.
I think there's a very good probability that we will find that a couple of the perpetrators of these horrific attacks are French citizens who have been and got military training and military experience in the northern Iraq Syrian theatre.
But France is not alone in attacking ISIL.
Why France? Why Paris? Well, it could have been London. It could have been anywhere. could have been New York, it could have been Sydney. I mean, this is the wake-up call.
While it may be coincidental, today's attack in Paris came just hours after a blow to Islamic State itself. The Pentagon says it's almost certain that a US drone strike in Syria killed the infamous militant known as Jihadi John.
This is significant, of course, because Jihadi John was somewhat of an ISIL celebrity, if you will.
He was actually British Muslim Mohammed Emwazi. He turned himself into a masked executioner who beheaded 7 hostages on camera and became a potent symbol of the terror group's brutality. Eddy Meyer, 9 News.
9 News reporter Tiffany Wertheimer was in a Paris cafe when she heard shots being fired in the Bataclan Theatre. I spoke to her a short time ago from outside the historic venue, where at least 80 concertgoers were killed.
Well, it's been a long, dark night in Paris. The French capital is still in lockdown this morning as Parisians wake to the horrific news of last night's attacks. Many of them won't even know that they happened because they occurred so late last night. Now, I was just around the corner from one of the first attacks, the restaurant shooting. When I first arrived at the scene, security was understandably very high. There was a huge police presence. They were heavily armed. And then about 15 minutes later, panic erupted among the small group of people who were watching on with me. Someone started yelling, "He's got a gun, he's got a gun." Then about 15 minutes after I arrived, panic erupted among the small group of people who were watching on with me. Someone was yelling in French, "He's got a gun, he's got a gun." People went running, they were falling over each other, they were hiding in local businesses, pulling down the shutters and hiding behind bins. Of course, this was a time when we didn't know what was going on in the streets. There was a lot of confusion in Paris, but we did know that a gunman was still on the loose. And this is Paris this morning. It should be an enjoyable Saturday morning, but history has now repeated itself and Parisians are mortified.
Now to the United States, where President Barack Obama has led world leaders in condemning the attacks. Let's go live now to Laura Turner. And Laura, the President was very quick to react to the news from Paris.
Good evening, Brett. That's right. President Obama made a very solemn address to the White House today, saying that this attack was outrageous, an outrageous attempt at terrorising the innocent, and not just an attack on the French, but on all of humanity. Now, France is the oldest ally of America, and President Obama spoke about that bond, saying that he would do everything in his power to help France bring the perpetrators to justice. He also spoke about the values that the two nations share. Take a listen.
Paris itself represents the timeless values of human progress. Those who think that they can terrorize the people of France or the values that they stand for are wrong. We are reminded in this time of tragedy that the bonds of liberté and égalité and fraternité are not only values that the French people care so deeply about, but they are values that we share.
Meantime, security has been stepped up right across the US tonight. There are extra police manning the Capitol building in Washington and in New York as well. Government buildings are being manned, especially the French consulate. Now, this is for fear of copycat attacks, but the Department of Homeland Security says that right now there is no credible or immediate threat to the US. Brett?
Laura Turner in our US Bureau, thank you. Back home, police have beefed up their presence on the city's streets. Despite reassuring Victorians there's no heightened terror threat here. Seb Costello joins me now live from Flinders Street Station. And Seb, what's the Chief Commissioner had to say?
Well, Brett, Graham Ashton described the crimes committed in France as the work of cowards. He detailed how, as soon as he heard of the news, he picked up the phone and called the Premier. And together they resolved to flood the streets of Melbourne with a visible police presence, focusing particularly on the fight event at Etihad Stadium tomorrow and the City to See Run, which begins in the parklands around the MCG.
Coordinated attacks and cowardly attacks, the work of cowards to have caused so much carnage. They were my first thoughts. Look, it is a significant event, and it's one that we have to be alert to, and one that we have to be constantly assessing our own communities to make sure that we're safe.
Brett, plans are being put in place for Melburnians to show their support for France in person, with a vigil being organised at Federation Square that's set to take place on Monday from 6 p.m. But tonight, Brett, Melbourne will take its place among the great cities of the world in lighting up various landmarks around town in the famous tricolours of France. The MCG, the NGV and the Art Centre Spire among the buildings taking place in a move that His Excellency Christophe Lecourtier, the ambassador to Australia, described as very important for our relationship with this European ally that we've long fought alongside.
Seb Costello, thank you. Malcolm Turnbull has pledged Australia's support to the people of France, vowing to stand shoulder to shoulder in the fight against terrorism. The Prime Minister is currently in Germany, where he'll be discussing the Syrian refugee crisis with Chancellor Angela Merkel. Charles Cratcher reports.
Attacks in the heart of Paris, resolve in the hearts of Australia.
We stand shoulder to shoulder with the people of France and with all free peoples in the battle against terrorism.
In front of the Brandenburg Gate, a symbol of unity and peace, the Prime Minister praising the courage of the French.
When the French people left the stadium after that shocking attack, they were not cowed. They sang their national anthem proudly. And that is how all free people should respond to these assaults. Freedom stands up for itself.
At home, the flag at the French embassy flew at half-mast as flowers were laid. Support for an ally on the far side of the world.
People in Paris, keep strong. We're all thinking of you, and you will get through this.
This is indeed a Black Friday for France and for the world.
The response of the French government will be swift and it will be strong. And Australia will stand with the French government.
Online, our leaders prayed for Paris, as Liberal Democrat Senator David Leyonhjelm prayed for more guns, retweeting the tragic outcome could have been avoided if citizens were armed.
Protecting Australians, protecting freedom is a global battle.
Earlier, a military welcome for the Prime Minister in Germany. Malcolm Turnbull embracing Angela Merkel as the German leader faces criticism for her open-door policy for Syrian asylum seekers, criticisms that will grow in the wake of the attacks.
I have no intention or desire to give advice on these matters to the German Chancellor.
The issue was discussed, but Tony Abbott's advice to close the borders ignored.
This is a matter for the German government, as it is for the Australian government, to manage these challenges in their own way.
The two leaders now bound for Turkey, where the G20 summit will continue in defiance.
I believe that the G20 will proceed in Turkey.
With the world's most powerful leaders set to attend, security was already tight. Turkish authorities arresting dozens of people with suspected links to ISIL.
In Australia, there's no change to our own threat levels, but concerned authorities are working with European counterparts.
Australian travellers advised to monitor the situation. Charles Croucher, 9 News.
And political reporter Lane Calcutt is travelling with the Prime Minister and filed this report from Berlin.
The whole of Europe is this morning waking to news of the attacks. I'm about to board a plane for the G20 Leaders Summit in Turkey, as will Malcolm Turnbull. The war in Syria was always going to be high on the agenda. It will now almost certainly dominate the conversations and the discussions. As it stands, French President Hollande will not attend, but the rest of the leaders, including Barack Obama and Vladimir Putin, will be there. The people of Brisbane know full well how tight security is at a summit like this. You can only imagine the security presence, the defence presence and the nerves that await us on the ground.
Lane Calcutt there. And the Department of Foreign Affairs has set up a hotline for those who are concerned about Australians in Paris. That number is 1300 555 135. After the break, the rest of the day's news. Concerns a missing teen may have run off with a man she met online. Police make an arrest over the Eastlink police hit run. Residents narrowly escape an out-of-control truck. And tensions boil over as Ronda Rousey comes face-to-face with her opponent.